Okay, we're live on LinkedIn. Yet again. Okay, good morning, everybody who has joined us so far. We are in our third event of this week's Career Growth Compass. And this is, again, part of our live event that we're doing in 2022. And we are thrilled again to have a fabulous group of gentlemen with us today. We've got John Rocca, we have got Lynn, we've got Pete Knox, and very soon we'll have John Donovan. So welcome again today to everyone who's joined us. Again, this is our third event for the week of the Career Growth Compass. And we've got an interesting panel. We've got a lot of interesting questions, and we welcome your participation as well. And for those of you who are new to Hayako, the word Hayako is kind of a play on a Japanese word called essentially iterate quickly. Get it out there quickly, learn from your mistakes, and keep going. And for those of you who have not yet actually taken advantage of the Hayako program, it is essentially a complementary program with a lot of the speakers that you've known and loved over the years. And we are excited to bring you not only some of those fabulous speakers from the past that you've known that are oftentimes involved in industry group meetings and other industry group meetings, is we also got some new players on the field. So we're excited to what we're going to bring you this year. And we're off and running for this year. So this session today is really about how do you get to the next level? Basically, if you're a credit manager and you're thinking, where can I go from this? What does my career opportunities look like? And a natural path is to go into the chief financial officer role. So we're going to have some discussion about that today. And again, we invite your questions and the Q&A. And if you are on our LinkedIn Live session, also throw some questions out there as well. And let's go ahead and get going. And we've got, again, our speakers today that are joining us. John Rocca, who's involved in credit for many, many years on the FCIB Advisory Board. He's also on our Hayako Academy Advisory Council as well. John Donovan, who's been a consultant for many, many years, quote to payment, subject matter expert. He's given all types of courses over the years. Of course, Pete Knox has been around from Nestle for many, many years and has come out of his retirement life on the beach and on the golf course to join us to share his expertise. And Lynn is someone who's relatively new to the world of credit collections, but he's got a phenomenal background and basically organizes the Financial Executive Credit Networking Group. So we are pleased again to have this group of gentlemen with us. And we hope today's session will be interesting, informative, and interactive. All right, gentlemen. So we ready to get going?
Sure.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, so we've got our first question here. And I think that when you look at what is involved in the credit department and the skills that one learns working in credit and collections, what specific skills would you say are definitely transferable to other departments and specific to what the office of the CFO is looking for? Bruce, can you give us some thoughts on that from your perspective?
Yes, thank you, Michelle. I think when you're in the credit department, one of the things to consider is that you're in one of the very rare departments that actually talks to people outside of the company. In other words, customers, probably the most valuable asset, if I can use that word, that the company has. After all, it's the customers who are buying all these widgets that you're selling. So the credit department is actually at the front end of a very valuable decision, which is to extend credit to a company on the hope, and I use that word loosely, on the hope that the company that you've extended credit to will pay you. So unknowingly, you are involved in many, many parts of the company, ranging from sales to treasury and cash collection. After all, if the customer is not paying you, that means that the treasurer is going to have to go out and find an alternate source of those funds. You also, depending on your company, may be exposing that company to a foreign exchange issue if the currency that the company is paying you, the customer is paying you, is not, let's say, U.S. dollars. So the credit department has really many skills that it could transfer. I'm sorry, an individual in the credit department has many skills that it can transfer over to other parts of the company when the company and that individual are ready. For example, sales, treasury, financial planning, even in the operations of the company in terms of what kinds of products that customer is buying. And of course, some products are more profitable than others. So there are many different areas that a individual in the credit department can transfer those skills to when they're ready.
And John Rocca, I have the feeling that you may also have some thoughts on this particular question.
I think Bruce was right. I think he covered it completely. I would iterate that when you talk about specific skills, the ability to listen, awareness, and judgment. We had a session earlier in the week. We looked at a similar set of topics, but those three skill sets, the ability to be a good listener, to be aware of missing information or what's not being said, and to have good judgment, to interpret, to understand, to make decisions. The opportunities for growth are endless. They might not lead to a chief financial officer's position, but there are many positions between a entry-level credit analyst, collector, first-level supervisor, manager. Those opportunities, if you're fortunate enough to be in a good company that's growing, they will be presented to you because of your effective communication skills, your demonstration repeatedly of good judgment, of enabling sales to create new revenue for the company, and your ability, as Bruce discussed, the importance of collecting that accounts receivable. The largest liquid asset of most companies, maybe all companies, is accounts receivable. It is so important. It makes the treasurer's day if you do your job very well.
I think that's such a good point, right? Is going back to a sale is really not a sale until the cash is in the door. And I think so many people within a company forget that. And they tend to not really give credit where credit is due to the credit collections department, is that cash flow can't come in until our departments actually do the job. So, and understanding what that company is about, right? To understand why that means so much to the bottom line is huge.
Right. If I could give one example, when you're speaking to that individual in the credit department about, well, how do I get from where I am today to where I want to be later in my career? You might tactically sit down with them and review their job description, the position that they're in today, and look at the first 5 responsibilities and maybe the first 5 qualifications in the job description. If it's well written, the first responsibility and the first qualification are the most important. And the 5th responsibility and the 5th qualification are the 5th most important. If it's written well, all job descriptions aren't, but let's assume that they are. And then the person you might ask the analyst, if you're talking to a credit analyst, for example, grade yourself. How well are you doing in your current role in your own view? Now, what jobs are there to move to? A financial analyst role, any role that you might be interested in that exists in your company today. Together, you can pull that job description and you could sit with the analyst and say, when we meet next month or next quarter, I'd like you to have gone through this position description and looked at the first qualifications, the first 5 qualifications, and the first 5 responsibilities. And when we meet next month, give me a bullet point on each one that describes you and how well you meet those requirements or those qualifications. And that will help the individual become more discerning and to discriminate, to see, well, I do have some of these strengths and here's where I'm missing experience. And do I want to go get that experience either in education, or do I want to train in a mentorship or in direct communication with my first level supervisor, and how to be better prepared to apply for that other job when the opportunity presents itself?
I think it's a great point. And I think just, understanding what are the goals of upper management, what are the goals of your CFO office, and when you understand that, and then you can bring it back to your own day-to-day activities. In fact, when I was at Experian and also at rent.com, I instructed all of my team members, whenever they got an email from a customer or someone internally that said, wow, you did a great job with XYZ, and it specifically related to the goals of upper management and the goals of the company, to make a file folder and save those emails. So when you get to the end of the quarter or the end of the year, and you're looking at your annual review, and of course, at the end of the year, you're like, what did you do that was great and fantastic? Well, it's hard to look back, 6, 8, 10, 12 months. But if you've got a folder and you've got a bunch of those email examples from customers or peers, it makes completing that document a lot easier, because now you can say, here's exactly what I did, not just from my perspective, but from my customer's perspective or my peers' perspective, and how this relates to the goals of the company. So it's always good to kind of capture those things, however you want to call it. But making sure that you are tracking when you are meeting your company's objectives, absolutely huge. Okay, so question number 2, we can get to. Here we go. So here's a question that I think all of you guys would probably be phenomenal at answering. But when you look at the experience that one gains in the credit department, when you look at in your past, in your history, what kind of experience that you've seen, what types of people have been able to move past credit, whether it's a staff position or management position, and really moved into the upper echelons of the company? What are some key things that you see that you could add to that process?
I can start with this. So at Nestle, what we did was, when we hired people with either a finance or accounting degree, with the mindset that they would be promoted either internally within our department or externally within Nestle within 2 years. And we had people move in all areas of the company. And when I say all areas, I mean anything in the order to cash area all the way to purchasing. And something that was not mentioned in the last question, how we relate to everybody in the company, was purchasing. At Nestle, we not only did credit risk for customers, but we also did it for suppliers, because any interruption in the supply chain could take a company down. So that was extremely important for us. So the answer that I am giving is that the great thing about credit is you get to see across all of the company. So that enables you to be able to move to probably any area within the company with the skills that you've gained on what we just talked about in the last question.
I think that's huge, right? When you look at some of your past experiences, are there any folks that you worked with that moved into an area that was really unexpected and not really the norm of kind of what you would see the normal progression from credit to collections to accounting and so forth, or treasury? Anybody moved into a role that you just kind of thought was really unusual, but the skills of credit collections helped them actually do well in that kind of role?
Michelle, can I answer that one?
Yes, John, glad you made it. Happy to see you.
Thank you. I'm in between thunderstorms, so if you hear noise in the background, it's one of the things that I did as part of the training for anybody that joined the company is I had them train with an experienced collector first, the ones that had the good rapport with their customers, as well as the skill set to deal with customers, whether they were upset, past due, whatever the case may be. But one of the things that we did that a lot of credit departments don't do is we had them work out in the warehouse on returns and disputes, and to actually see what was happening and to get firsthand look at all of the stuff that's coming back in, tractor trailer loads sometimes. And you'd look at it and the box is damaged, the stuff that's in the box that's being returned isn't what we sold, and on it goes. And they get to learn the logistics piece of the business, dealing with the carriers, dealing with the shipping department. And that's important because if you're dealing with disputes, you want to have a good understanding of what's going on. So job rotation, whether it's, for a week, a day, to get that experience is invaluable.
I think it's a great point. Go ahead.
John, to your point, I think that every employee that comes into a company should start in credit, because any issue in the order to cash process ends up in AR as a result, it resulting in either a past due or a deduction. So having people see that when they move into other areas, hopefully they remember those issues and don't make those mistakes that they had seen in credit.
Totally agree. Totally agree.
I would add two areas that might not be so obvious. One is financial planning. A credit department's involvement with customers gives you a very strong understanding of how those customers value a company, the products, and John's point about returns and disputes, I think is a very valuable exercise. Everybody assumes that once it's out the door, it all works well. Well, just like real life, there are unexpected issues that you have to deal with. And understanding the natural ebb and flow of the customers, you understand their demand. So you're really talking about a forward-looking sales and forecasting, planning and forecasting situation that your experience as a credit professional will give you some great insight in. The second one, and of course I have a bias here, the second one is the Treasury Department. One of the things that might not be so obvious is that the collection of all your receivables, the portfolio of all your receivables is an asset that the treasurer can use to preserve liquidity within the company. It acts as a borrowing base, but no bank will lend you money against uncollected receivables or receivables that will remain uncollected because of, guess what, disputes and other issues. That means that the customer is not going to pay for an orange one when he ordered a blue one. So the more understanding you have of that, the more you can be helpful to the treasurer or the treasury function, because it all has to do with liquidity. And as was said before, the vast majority of any company's cash flow comes from the collection of their receivables.
Absolutely. And I'll have to throw in there, I think, we've had a lot of conversations in the past year, and we'll have a lot more this coming year on, the dynamic between the sales team and the credit team, the collection team. And that's always one of those scenarios where anytime you can get a sales rep to sit in on a collection call, or a collection rep or credit rep to go out in the field and sit and spend a day with the sales rep, those two positions are so vitally important to cash flow. And they often are at odds. They don't really understand what the other role is, what the other aspect is. So when you can actually have someone, stand in your shoes and actually see why this is so important, it really helps bridge the gap between, why are we doing this? Why is this so important? And bringing the urgency when the sales rep is, getting paid. Sales rep only gets paid if the deal gets through and the deal gets booked. In some cases, not until the deal is paid, not often enough. But that cross training and being aware of all these different positions and how your job impacts every other role in the business or department of the business, just it's huge.
Michelle,
Let's go ahead.
Before we move on, just on
Yeah.
the last part of the question was roles that people can move into. And there is no right or wrong answer, but let me just add an answer that may not be obvious to people with accounting backgrounds primarily. Sales. To be an effective analyst, collector, you have to be able to communicate well. You are in sales, everybody is in sales. We all don't recognize that we're in sales. Growth and compensation. When I think about a middle or beginning or end of career individual that has spent time in the credit organization, there are a percentage of those people that have migrated into sales. Sales tends to present very good compensation opportunities for people. And I've not seen anyone move from credit manager to CFO. I'm sure it's happened, but I have seen them move through all the financial roles and into the C-suite, and I've seen them as presidents and CEOs of companies. So it's not limited. It's being well-grounded, well-educated, and if you're only good at one thing, if you're well-grounded but you're not well-educated and you have the desire, go back to school and get that education. Having the credential will help you depending on what your long-term ambitions are. And I'll stop there.
Yeah, and that's a whole nother topic too that we should really talk about at a future date, or maybe today if we have time, is just the value of credentials to you as an individual, and also the perception of those credentials to others that are in a position to hire you or promote you. Huge topic right there. So let's get into this. When you look at leaders and who would you want to move into a leadership position, what are the kind of top qualities that obviously, sure, good communication skills, they get along with people, they can maybe mitigate conflict between folks, but what have you seen on the folks that have really evolved into a leadership role? What would you point out as some skills that maybe aren't quite so commonly known or commonly discussed that makes a good leader?
Well, I'd like to bring up maybe one that's unfortunately much discussed these days, but is an issue of politics. Because of the things that we've said so far, someone in the credit department is talking to many, many different constituencies, from those outside the company to those inside the company. And so in my definition of politics, what it really means is you have to, as it's been said before, communicate well, but also be sensitive to someone else's point of view. And this is where the politics sort of fall into, is that you have to know who the quote unquote reader is, and you have to respond accordingly. Now, there are issues that you have to face. Sometimes you have to compromise. I mean, as we all know, as good collectors, sometimes you don't collect 100% of what's owed to you, and you have to settle for 90. Well, right away, that in itself is a good quality to remember, that in any negotiation, you never get 100%. But it is important to keep those lines of communication open and be sensitive to what is a win for everyone.
I think it's a good point. And even kind of the word politics, right? Every organization is political, whether it's a nonprofit, whether it's a church, whether it's a corporation, whether it's even a group of friends, right? And the word politics kind of has a negative connotation, right? Because a lot of people look at that as like, oh, I have to learn how to be manipulative or take advantage of people. But that's not really it, right? It sounds like, Bruce, what you're saying is being able to kind of read the room, being able to understand the environment in which you operate and understand those people's perspectives. Is that a better description, maybe?
It is. And now I would still say there are some issues, unfortunately, that are non-negotiable. And I think you have to be clear. That's the communication side of these things. I mean, for any deal to happen, you have to have something they want, and they have to have something you want. If that isn't going to happen, then you're not going to have a deal. You're not going to be successful, at least from your perspective, and that might be the case. I don't think you can be successful in 100% of every situation, but certainly reading the room is important, and making sure that sort of up front people understand sort of what you stand for. At the end of the day, people do business with who they trust.
Mhm.
And that trust is a very amorphous concept. And you just have to be sensitive to what it means to the guy on the other side of the table.
Mhm.
I would agree with all of that. And I think an additional quality that I've seen in a number of leaders that I've had the pleasure of working with and for is communications. You can't say everything because laws don't prohibit you from telling everybody everything, but communicating with your staff and with your customers is very important. And a lot of companies isolate themselves as they get bigger and don't really spend the time with the customers or their personnel. And as a result, the gaps grow and companies falter as a result. And it doesn't mean you have to be 100% straightforward with people. I worked for one gentleman and he was concerned about the state of the economy and his business. And he made a tough decision to let people go, even though it was a very close-knit organization. So you also have to be a fair and honest communicator, but you also have to make some tough decisions along the way. And it's best to communicate to people why you're doing that rather than just giving a pink slip and let them walk out the door because they won't come back.
I think under the heading of communications, I think one of the things you have to communicate to everyone is what are your values and what are your values at risk? I mean, at the end of the day, you must take a risk. That's what business is all about. No risk, no return. And everyone in the organization has to understand that. But the question is, what is it that you're risking? And what are the values here? And there are some values that you just can't risk. And again, trust is one of them. I mean, a customer will do business with you this one time and then never again. So I guess that's a transactional win, but it's not a relational win. And businesses are built on relationships. And I think this is, again, something that the credit department is deeply involved with, because there are customers that you wish to do business with once, twice, obviously ongoing. And so building relationships with them is going to be very helpful, especially when that last order showed up broken in a pile of pieces.
Exactly.
For whatever reason, my fault, your fault, whatever. And the customer's going to go, okay, that's fine, but they'll reorder again because they trust you to make it right, and you'll do the right thing for them, issue the credits or whatever it is, because they trust you, as opposed to, well, I just shipped you that, now pay me. That's a long-term strategy for disaster.
Absolutely. And this kind of leads into our next question really here about what are specifics around communication and political skills needed to be perceived as promotable? Can y'all think of, some examples where either someone did a beautiful job of communication or political navigation, or, scenarios where you've seen someone just blew it and really ruined an opportunity because they weren't aware of how to properly communicate or navigate that political landscape?
I'd like to start with this one. So, excellent oral and written skills are an absolute must here. And when I got my MBA, believe it or not, the most important class that I found in my MBA was a class called Writing for MBAs. And I got more out of that class than all of the other finance classes that I took. And it really helped me, I think, in my career. It taught me how to write to the audience. We talked about, reading the room a little while ago. Mm-hmm. You have to also remember who your audience is when you're writing something. For example, we did a high-risk report every quarter. And that high-risk report went out to top management and most of our sales, at least the top probably third of all of our salespeople. And one of the things that I always reminded my analysts and managers of was know your audience. You got to remember that the salespeople really don't know finance, and they don't care about EBITDA and things like that.
Exactly.
Because they don't understand it. Once you start talking about leverage and EBITDA and all of this, they're going to stop reading.
All right.
So-
the eyes start to glaze over and they're like, yeah, whatever.
It's important that you dumb it down for them so that they understand it, so they keep reading. So I think that's extremely important in terms of knowing your audience and writing to that audience. I think another important thing is keeping cool under pressure. Anybody that's in credit understands that there is going to be times when you have to make a credit decision very quickly with limited information. And, you've got sales right on your back. I need this order shipped tomorrow. So you have to make a quick decision, but you have to keep cool and make the best decision you can under pressure. Team player, I think, is extremely important. When I say the political skills, that gets dicey, especially in a very large organization. I saw a number of people grab onto somebody else's coattails, and they stayed with those coattails until that person got let go. And all of a sudden, they were on an island with nowhere to go. So important that you be aware of the politics that are going on in an organization, and try to stay as neutral as possible so that you don't end up on an island yourself.
Great point. Can you all share your thoughts on, speaking of written communication, sending out emails, and I guess emails specifically it always surprises me how many misspellings and grammatical errors there are. And when you're looking at someone who maybe has all the, the qualifications on paper, but they can't write a decent email, or they keep using the wrong verb, the wrong tense, the wrong, the structures, wrong spelling. What is that? How important is that people's spelling and grammar is perfect?
Well,
I judge people actually by that. And I actually have my notes here. Use spell check. Because if they either have a misspelling or a grammatical error, that tells me they didn't proof it before they sent it out. And I judge people on that. So
I would add one sort of maybe not so obvious observation, that emails are not appropriate in all cases. One of the beauties of Zoom, of course, is you get to see people. There's a downside to that, of course, but in many cases, when you try to read into an email, what did that person mean? People are, and again, the other side of the coin here, people do not write well. So the email comes across as meaning something that they didn't really mean. Why?
Mm-hmm.
Because they don't write well. And yet you do want to understand what they're doing. So sending emails back and forth so that 10 emails later you go, aha, that's what they meant. You could have done that in maybe a 5-minute phone call, A. And B, the old fashioned, calling is, or a Zoom call, whatever, is actually a better way to build a relationship than sending emails back and forth. So before you sort of send that next email, think about, is this email really appropriate, or should I be talking to people? Because emails are, for all intents and purposes, broadcasting. And of course, you can copy the world with an email. So you're talking to 20 people, but you're not talking to them, you're talking at them. Mm-hmm. Communications is a two-way form of reaching another person. So again, which is the appropriate tool, if you will? Emails are great. I mean, if you need to send information out to 20 people, in the old days, you'd have to copy all this stuff and put it in inter-office mail, and I mean, where with one email, you can keep 20 people up to date, and that's really valuable. But when it comes down to some very tricky situations, I'm not sure that writing, as opposed to speaking, is the best form of communication.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so on that topic, have you ever had somebody who you really felt you wanted to promote, they were doing a great job, they checked all the boxes of, this is someone that would move into the next role, but they had challenges in either writing or speaking that did you ever send somebody like, listen, you need to go take a class on proper grammar and writing? Or, I mean, have you ever sent somebody back to that to say, when you pass this, when you can prove to me that you can actually write a decent sentence without these typos and using the wrong words, then I'll promote you? Or have you just not promoted them and just ignored them and move on? Pete, I saw your head nodding.
We sent them to classes on how to write. You know, because that's a reflection actually on the department.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I certainly wouldn't just ignore them because, you know, they'll leave. But yeah, we had courses within the company on, writing, as well as, you know, another thing is presentations. Can they stand up and give a presentation? And we had presentation classes.
And it's good to think about, Michelle, when you're communicating with a customer, some of them have a preference. They are inundated with emails or text messages, and they don't have time to go through what somebody and try to decipher what somebody is saying. The tone might be wrong. They might just be looking at it from the wrong perspective. So it's important that you know your customers well enough to know how to communicate them, not only what to communicate.
Yeah, I love seeing more and more where you got like different software tools that will actually let you choose what is the customer's preference for communication. Do they want a text message? Do they want an email? Do they want a phone call? You know, what's their primary, secondary, and tertiary preference? It really helps customize that communication, which it's nice to see.
Michelle, if I could, there again, it's a topic that's so broad, but in some cases you must write. In other cases, as Bruce said, the best communication is live communication between you and the recipient of your thoughts. And you need to do both. I never worked in an environment where you sent people for writing courses, but it's a good idea. But we often send people for communication training, public speaking, hiring theater coaches to teach people how to give presentations, and also sending people to political speaking organizations. I can think of one particular one that we used to use in San Francisco when I was with HP in Palo Alto that was remarkably effective because it taught you how to deal with confrontational audiences and how to manage that type of communication. And when you graduated from that program, you were better prepared in how to manage your career inside the soft place of a Fortune 20 company. Everything that everyone's talked about is important, but there's times when written communication is required. If it's supplemented with telephone calls, or as the Japanese use the term, nemi washing, you go to a meeting, you don't make decisions at a meeting, you've had 10 meetings before the meeting, and you're faced with the 10 participants, and you've gotten agreements so that when you make the presentation, everyone nods their head in agreement. It's written communications, it's oral communications, it's being comprehensive.
It's a good point. Absolutely.
All the above. And when you must write a report for a blue book quarterly for a public company on the quality of accounts receivable, or a monthly narrative that doesn't bore people, write it before it's required. Set it down, come back to it, make it smaller, make it concise. If you're at 400 words, get it to 250 words. Keep making it smaller. There's an old saying, I wrote you a long letter because I didn't have the time to write you a short letter. Write short letters. But you have to write the first letter, and that's the long letter, and get rid of all the non-essential information, all the typing errors, all the redundancies. Make it concise, and that takes time, revisiting it 2 or 3 times before you finalize it.
Love it. Totally love it. Which really is a nice lead into our question number 5 is, when you're looking back and what you know, based on what you know now, what kind of advice would you give to someone who is early to mid-stage career? What are kind of, maybe you think of like the top 3 skills? What advice would you give to people in that role?
Well, I think John came up with a great one, which is public speaking. And I would just tweak that by saying volunteer for being a panelist, volunteer for speaking at various conferences. Now, if you don't like them, to John's point, you better learn, because you think about what the CFO. Do you think the CFO is somewhere down in the bowels of the ship doing credits and debits? He or she is talking to bankers, or talking to people outside the company, using a variety of political and financial skills. But public speaking, being able to think on your feet is certainly an excellent way to do that. And that's because that person has had practice for the last, 20 years. So if you are in your mid-career, 5 years out of school, 10 years out of school, seek out those kinds of situations. And if you're uncomfortable, get some training. But just staying behind a desk and not getting out of your office, that is not going to help your advancement.
And we talk about a lot about soft skills, and anybody that's been in credit and collections for a while, or finance and accounting for that matter, everything is changing. And if you're not staying in lockstep with those changes, you become obsolete. You have to keep all of your skills, your writing skills, your communication skills, and your technical skills up to speed. You just can't lay back and hope that things will go your way. Organizations are changing very rapidly, and you have to stay in lockstep with that change.
Absolutely.
Let me offer another piece of advice that might not be obvious. When we talk about career advancement, from my way of thinking, a career advancement for a credit collection professional can actually be outside of a non-financial company and working for a bank. Now, it depends on your background, your skills, and obviously, but when you're looking at, when you've worked at multinational companies, who's on the other side of the desk here? Sometimes it's your banker. And let me tell you, bankers really want to know about how that company functions and how that cash flow comes in, because that's how their loans get paid back. So when you talk about careers and skills that you want, it might be reasonable to think about, well, gee, maybe instead of working for the ABC widget company, I want to work for the ABC Bank in trade finance, which is a growing and profitable part of banking these days.
Good point. Absolutely.
Another thing, and a couple of things that I have on this is take initiative. Very important. If you see an issue, take the initiative to lead in solving an issue. Also, be willing to take advice or criticism and act on it. I think that's important in terms of improving the skills that you have. I think Bruce said thinking on your feet, extremely important. We've talked about presentation skills, also good judgment. Those are the things that I would look at in terms of advancing somebody in their career.
John Rocca, did we hear from you on this question?
Well, everything that has been said, I would echo. I don't think I can add anything that's remarkably unique.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Again, that could even be a whole nother session as well. So that kind of leads us to our next question here is, when you look at the other end, right, the opposite side of the coin, when you look at good people who've got good skills, what can you think of are the top reasons why they're not promoted, or why you personally wouldn't promote someone, or people that you've worked with that you've seen just everything looked great on paper, but for some reason they're not getting promoted, they're not getting a pay raise, they're not getting advancement. What do you see, and why do you think that is?
I've seen examples of that play out earlier in my career with a very large multinational, and a very senior executive who was responsible for sales and operations for, at the time, probably a $30 billion company. And he was coaching people that were prejudiced against certain individuals because of a problem that occurred earlier in their career, 5 or more years earlier. And he asked both of those individuals, who were very outspoken about why this particular person that was being evaluated, they were not present, but they were being discussed for a promotional opportunity. And these two individuals were taking their turns at articulating the problem that this person was involved in years before. And the senior most executive said, "Are you the same person that you were yesterday? Are you the person that you were 5 or 10 years ago?" And it really made an impression on me to give people a second chance. And everyone doesn't do that. And to allow people to make mistakes, to create an environment where it's okay to fail, will enable what you're asking about not to occur. So I don't know the answer to your question. I just know that we should create environments, and I've tried to do this in my career, where it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to explain what went wrong. Have a logical reason to be able to articulate why you made the decision you made, but make the decision. We need to build teams of decision makers, and you have to give people the permission to be wrong, to fail. And that's the only way they grow. As a small boy in Philadelphia, one Sunday afternoons, my father would drive the car past a place called Byberry State Hospital. And I didn't know what it was, but later someone said, "Well, that's where crazy people live." And when I asked my mother that, she said, "No, crazy people don't live there, John. People who can't make decisions live there." And that stayed with me my entire life. If you can't make up your mind, you probably do go crazy. So
It's a really good point.
make decisions. Don't worry about making the wrong decision. You'll make better decisions, but create an environment as leaders to be an effective leader. Allow your team members to feel safe, to make mistakes, and be able to articulate the steps they've employed and review those steps with them. You can probably find how they can improve the process in the future without threatening them, and embracing the team member and making that a safe environment. That would be my thoughts.
I'd like to add to that, John. It's all good points. And I think if you're in an organization that itself is stagnant, sometimes it's best to look beyond where you are to get the promotions you deserve.
I think it's a good point. We talked the other day on one of the other sessions about just a good fit, right? Sometimes you've got someone who's really talented and they've got a lot of potential, but they're just not a good fit for that department or that role. And maybe, the ability of doing some cross training, right? If you can get that person some exposure to a different section of your company, a different department, a different role, that maybe that can help facilitate promotion. They just, for whatever reason, they're just not in the right spot yet. And Pete, I know you must have some stories of people who really wanted to get promoted, but just wasn't happening. And I know there must be some crazy stories behind why they didn't.
I have plenty.
Go ahead, Pete.
No, one that comes to mind is somebody who wouldn't take advice, or was not good at taking criticism and reacted poorly. That's you got to stay even keeled, regardless of whether you're being criticized or praised. So
yeah, I'd agree. And, I'll give an example. I've had some very young, aggressive, smart individuals in my departments. And I would promote them outside my department if I didn't have room for them within the department. And I would get comments back like they're too young, they're too inexperienced. They never gave them the opportunity, and it chased them away from the company.
Mhm.
And that's the last thing you want to do with a good employee, is discourage them from advancing their careers.
I think that there's another reason too, is that some companies are selfish. They don't promote good people because that means they have to replace them and they're lazy. And as long as that person doesn't leave and is happy with their work, they'll give them a few bucks here or there, but is that a promotion? No. So the company, when you say good people, sometimes companies either A, don't know they have good people, and that's a sort of more of an HR function. I worked at a credit collection function earlier in my career at a company that doesn't exist anymore. Now, there's many reasons why that company doesn't exist. It was a Fortune 500 company at the time. But credit collection was just, from the company's perspective, really not that important. Sales was important, and therefore credit collection was sort of in the way. And they were party poopers, and so there were a lot of good people there. But why promote them? That was just not. It just wasn't something the company wanted to do. But of course, that company's not around anymore.
Yeah, interesting story, which kind of leads us into the next one. If you are in the executive suite, you're in the C-suite, and you are looking for people to bring up and to promote, what are you looking for? What kind of attributes are you looking for? And if you were going to pluck someone from that role to bring up the ladder?
I think it's really a person who understands over time. This is not something that you find out on day two in the company, but you have to have a curiosity, I guess is a good term. You really want to understand how the company works, what the company is looking for, how to make it a better company. Does that mean you're aggressive? Well, in certain cases, yes, but it's also just an awareness. As has been said before, you want to play for the team. You want to make sure the team wins. It doesn't mean you ignore yourself, but you want to have, quite frankly, you want to have an occasion to get in front of the CFO. Mm-hmm. So, from a very narrow standpoint, what do I have to do to make sure I'm I'm having drinks with the CFO, or I'm at some event that they're at, and quite frankly, they notice you. Volunteering for things is very risky to some people, but no guts, no glory, as has been said before, and that's something that the C-suite actually values.
Yeah, and by volunteering for things, not only are you helping the company, but you're helping yourself, because you're learning through all of those volunteer opportunities.
And Michelle, again, I've never been a CFO, but in thinking about this earlier this morning, and I talked about it with a few of us that were on the pre-call today. I worked with a young lady who was hired as a financial analyst in a Fortune 20 company at the time, Hewlett Packard. And she ended up as the CFO of Hewlett Packard. And in her interview, she was graduating undergraduate from Stanford, MBA from Cal. And in her interview with the then CFO, a guy named Bob Wayman, who I worked for many years, excellent CFO, he said to her, if you're fortunate enough to get an opportunity to come to work at Hewlett Packard, because she was interviewing and hadn't been offered a job, he said, if you want to succeed in the long term, be a risk taker. Take on new responsibilities continually that stretch you out of your comfort zone. And if you went to the Haas Business School's website, it may not be there today, but Kathy Leschak is the person I'm thinking of. She wrote about that at their website to encourage people as they develop their careers. Bob Wayman's advice to her, she said, that's what I did when I got to Hewlett Packard. I reached out for jobs beyond my ability. I didn't get them all, but I was willing to take on risks and move out of my comfort zone in order to grow. And she ended up as the chief financial officer at Hewlett Packard, one of the few Fortune 100 female CFOs at her time in those days. She has since retired.
Any other thoughts on that, gentlemen? I don't know what's going on here. Everybody still connected?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
I think we've covered pretty much everything in all of the questions leading to this question number 7. I mean,
Mhm.
we talked about the presentation skills being so important. Absolutely, communication skills, being able to think on your feet. One of the things that we didn't say was having a tough discussion, not just with a customer, but with employees. That's what a good leader, especially in the credit area or the CFO area,
Mhm.
you're going to have some tough discussions, and you've got to be able to do it with little emotion, but tell it like it is, and be able to answer questions.
Yeah, I would add, I would add one sort of suggestion is that to be successful, you're going to have to sort of set up some metrics that everyone agrees represents success. Now, there's always a qualitative side to these things, and I'm not sure that there is one metric. DSO is not the be all and end all. But what is success? Is it retention? Is it attracting new customers? Is it collecting X number of dollars per week? I don't know. But I think it should be very clear what the metrics are. You don't need a whole room full, but I think you do need some that everyone agrees represent success at various levels in the company, not just the next level up. But I mean, what does a CFO consider to be success? I mean, if they can't really tell you that, then you're in a department that is going to be a little bit sort of a ship without a rudder.
Mhm.
So you need to understand that, and maybe it's obvious, but sometimes what's obvious to one person is not obvious to another, and there causes confusion and frustrations and lack of promotions and all the things we've been talking about to date. So trying to nail that down, that is the political side of any company.
All good points. Absolutely. Well, I think we are actually running up against, we're a couple minutes over already. We've had a couple questions come in actually that ended up getting answered through the conversation, it looks like. And I'm having a little technical difficulties here, so I'm really not sure what screen everybody's seeing at this point. But hopefully the folks that are still on the call, we'd love to get some feedback from you. Rating the session 1 to 5, the value of it. You should see a pop-up poll question occur. And I think this is, this whole topic of promotions and advancements and career growth. There's a lot more to be said about this. And I would like to invite everyone that's participated in the call today. We do have an online discussion, which you'll receive an email with a link to that. And our fabulous presenters today and the ladies from yesterday, we are available. They are all available to give you some feedback, answer your questions. I would encourage you to connect with them on LinkedIn. Thank you. Thank you for your time. Glad you guys could join us today, and wanted to just also remind everyone that we have got a couple things coming up. If you are going to be in the Nashville area, we've got the High Radiance Conference. It'll be at the Nissan Stadium. Should be a really fun, good event, socially distanced, and all COVID preparations and precautions will be in play. And also to remind you, if you have not yet joined the Hayako community, there is some phenomenal information out there. We've got over, I think, 1,400 video snippets, any kind of topic you can think of, or actually launching a whole new category that is applicable really even today. We talked about soft skills and personal skills, and we're bringing on one of our speakers, John Boyens, who joined us back in November, because it isn't just about hard skills, right? It is about the politics and the communications and how do you get along with difficult people of different generations. All of those are factors in growing and expanding in your career and just interacting with people. So we're very excited about what's coming up in the future. And again, we'd love your participation if you're interested in, if you've got some thoughts on what we talked about this week. We also own Credit Today. So if you're interested in being interviewed for an article related to any of these topics, or if you would like to add some more value, some thoughts that you have or some stories that you have that you think would be helpful to the folks in our audience, we would absolutely love to hear from you. So shoot us a note, michelle.herman@hayako.com. You can find us all on LinkedIn as well. And with that, gentlemen, any final words? We've got a minute or two left before we sign off. Any final comments from our illustrious group of panelists?
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Michelle. And
Thank you.
great by you on moderating these panels.
Well, you guys are fantastic. So it's a pleasure to interact with all of you. And we look forward to having you on again in future events, and also participating in our online forum as well. So thanks so much to everyone, and have a great afternoon, and we'll see you at our next event.